Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BC coming here to break down another fight on Google Hangout. You know, very excited about this one. Very, very excited about this one. So before I even get into it, if you guys don't know already, it's been reported by many news outlets from the boxing world that Terence Crawford will fight Viktor Postol on July 23rd, HBO PPV MGM Grand, Las Vegas, Nevada. It will determine a lot about who is truly the best at 140 pounds. Now, we have this is the second fight in boxing right now where you're getting two guys that are in their prime. You know, I wouldn't say that it's the second of two prime A-level fighters because this is the only fight in boxing where you're getting two prime A-level guys, A-class fighters fighting each other. Thurman and Porter is happening, but I don't consider that a prime for prime A-level fight because Porter is not A-level, Thurman is not A-level. But with that being said, probably to me, outside of Ward Kovalev, probably even more so than Ward Kovalev, I'm very excited for this fight. Very excited for this fight because here you have two guys that people have their questions about. People have their questions about Crawford. He's been fighting guys coming up from 135 to 140. He hasn't even fought a 240-pounder yet. You know, he gets a chance to legitimize himself. You got Postol, who just stopped Lucas Batista, the only guy to ever stop Lucas Batista. He broke his will, made him quit. But some people think that he's not the top, the creme de la creme at 140. And they think that Postol would get beat by the likes of Terence Crawford. There's some people that think Postol will lose to the likes of Miri Imam. You know, stylistically speaking, that's a good fight. But wanted to get into this fight, so really excited for this fight because it gives these fighters a chance to really prove themselves, and it gives Crawford a chance to continue to build his own fan base. Postol a chance to build a fan base. So it works out for both guys. But let's get into it, man. Terence Crawford comes into this fight at 28 years old, fights as a switch hitter, mainly out of the orthodox stance, but can fight southpaw, has no problem staying in the southpaw stance. Comes in with a 70-inch reach and a record of 28-0 with 20 KOs. Viktor Postol, on the other hand, comes in at 32 years old, orthodox stance, 73.5-inch reach, and he comes in with a record of 28-0 with 12 KOs. So just looking at the records, look at the physical tools. Two things jump out at you. Or three things jump out at you, really. The age factor. Postol is 32 years old. That's 4 years older than Crawford. So with that being said, you know, he might be 4 years older than Crawford. They have the same level of professional experience, and that's because Postol, you know, these Ukrainian guys from Eastern Europe, they tend to stay amateur longer, and they wind up getting the good amateur experience, and they become better and more seasoned fighters once they're already in the pro ranks. So he's one of those guys. And then the reach factor, you know, Terence Crawford has benefited a lot, dating back to his days at 135. When he was at 135, he'd fight guys who were 130, and he'd have a significant reach advantage, height advantage, and he was able to exploit that and either box their ears off or KO them, which he did in the Gamboa fight, did it against Ray Beltran, he did it against Ricky Burns, did it against Breeders. Well, Breeders Prescott's not a shorter guy, but mainly guys like Gamboa and Hank Lundy, guys who are kind of smaller. So it's gonna be interesting to see how he deals with a bigger opponent. He has beat a guy that was bigger than him when he first burst onto the scene, and he took the Breeders Prescott fight on 2 weeks' notice. He beat Breeders Prescott, outboxed him, outclassed him, and destroyed him when he was a relative unknown. So he has done it before, it just hasn't been in a while, and people have their questions about him. So he can very much legitimize him. So it's going to be interesting to see how he deals with a taller opponent. We saw in the heavyweight division, Klitschko had the same thing. He was fighting guys who were smaller, Alex Leopai, Kubrat Pulev, fought a guy who was taller than him, who could box, who could move a little bit, and he struggled to make that adjustment. Can Crawford make that adjustment? I think he has the boxing IQ to make that adjustment, but it's very tough, man. Viktor Postol, when he fights in America, is a different animal because in Ukraine, where he fought a lot, the gloves they use there are slightly heavier, and he's come to America, and they use lighter gloves here. I think these 12-ounce gloves here. Ukraine is slightly heavier, and that makes all the difference. If you guys don't know this, he's had 4 fights in the United States, and he has 3 KOs in the United States. He's knocked out. His 2 most notable wins are knockouts. He knocked out Selçuk Aydin, and he knocked out Lucas Matisse. So don't let the 12 KOs deceive you on his record. He might have only 12 KOs, but by no stretch of the imagination is Viktor Postol some light pillow punching, junior welterweight. This guy can crack. And if Crawford's not careful, as we've seen in the past in the Gamboa fight, we saw it in the Lundy fight, Crawford can get hurt, and that's what makes this fight interesting. 73.5 inches reach, that's big. That's a long reach. That's a middleweight reach at his weight class. So a lot of guys struggle fighting Postol. A lot of guys refuse to want to fight Postol at all. Danny Garcia paid Postol step-aside money when Postol worked his way up to become the WBC mandatory. So he presents a lot of stylistic disadvantages for his opposition because of the reach, the height, and the fact that he can punch in America. The gloves are lighter. So Crawford's going to have a hard time. But I have confidence in Crawford due to the fact that, while Postol has KO'd guys, let's look at the guys he's really KO'd. Selçuk Aydin, a good fighter, good name, but not, you wouldn't confuse him with no upper B-level fighter. He's a C-class, lower B guy. Matisse, really good fighter. Nobody's ever stopped him, but look at the way he fights. Doesn't really have a lot of defensive skill or head movement, and that's always been his whole career. He looked like he was getting better in the Provodnikov fight in that facet of his fight game, but pretty much, look who he was fighting. Provodnikov, anybody can look defensively good against Provodnikov. He's slow, he loads up a lot of punches, and it's easier to slip punches against Provodnikov, but if he lands, he will hurt you, and he has done that in the past. So, Matisse doesn't really move his head. So it's going to be interesting to see a guy like Terence Crawford, when you put him in front of Postol, who is a little awkward. Crawford can move, slip, slide, duck punches, change styles, and create his own punching angles. When you can go from orthodox to southpaw, you change a lot of things stylistically. Because if you're orthodox, right? If you're an orthodox fighter fighting another orthodox fighter, especially if you're fighting against a guy who is a long, lanky orthodox fighter, it's a little hard to pump your jab past that guy, past that long reach. So for Crawford, I think the remedy and what he's going to be able to do in this fight is he might be in the orthodox stance for a little bit, not a whole long time, but he'll be in the orthodox stance to just look at what Postol's giving him. And then when he sees what he wants, he'll switch to southpaw, and then you're going to see Crawford, stick that jab, because it's a lot easier if you're fighting a long legged guy out of the orthodox stance, right? You're here, and it's just harder to pump your jab. When you're pumping your jab from the other side, it's hard for other guy, because traditionally guys who fight orthodox aren't used to the jab coming from the other side, but rather the straight right. When it's a jab rather than a straight right, it creates a whole new ball game, and he has to move differently, and Crawford can cut off the ring. I'm saying Crawford can force Viktor to think more up here, and it can make it easier for him to cut off the ring. So when you put a guy like that in front of Postol, I'm interested to see how Postol's going to react. But another thing I'm interested to see is, we saw Gamboa, who came up from 130 to 135 for the Crawford fight, off of a 1-year layoff. He had success. He used that Olympic pedigree, amateur experience to win those first 2 or 3 rounds, and then he was able to hurt Crawford. And he stunned Crawford a couple times. Round 3 stunned Crawford. Round 3, round 2 he stunned Crawford, and then later in the fight, before Crawford knocked him out, he had Crawford hurt. So if a guy like Gamboa, who at his weight is a devastating puncher, but when he's not fighting at his natural weight, which is 130, goes up to 135, off a year layoff at that, hurts Crawford. What's a guy like Postol, who's coming off of a stoppage of Lucas Matisse? Okay, that guy has a lot of. Say what you want about Postol, that guy has a lot of momentum right now. All right, he stopped Lucas Matisse. Danny Garcia couldn't stop Lucas Matisse. Couldn't stop Lucas Matisse. And Matisse was coming off the Pavana confidence. So Matisse had a lot of momentum himself. Had a lot going for him. A lot of confidence. He broke his spirit, broke his will. It's one thing to knock somebody out. It's another thing to break their spirit and break their will. And that's what Postol was able to do. So Crawford is going to have a huge challenge on his hands. I think the interesting thing about this fight too is like, look at it's always good to look at common opponents, and as boxing fans, we often tend to do that anyway. You look at their common opponent, being Hank Lundy, who I feel is underrated. His record doesn't really indicate how good of a fighter he is, because he got robbed against Herrera. And really in the Postol fight, he was putting in some work on. If you guys haven't seen that Viktor Postol Hank Lundy fight, I mean, they fought in a random gym somewhere in the Ukraine. It's a weird looking gym, but when you watch the fight, Hank Lundy, I mean, with all respect to Viktor Postol, he's a great fighter, but there was a couple rounds in that fight, Hank Lundy was kicking this dude's ass. Sorry, that was a close fight. He won unanimous. I know when you go on boxing media, it says unanimous decision, but Hank Lundy he did really good work against Postol. He was really crafty, able to get on the inside, just really put on a good performance. And Lundy, like Crawford, can switch styles, switch stances, I should say, and he was able to use that to his advantage. So if Postol struggling with a smaller guy, not as much power, not as much skill as Crawford, what's going to happen when Crawford's in front of him? Postol did win. He did enough to win, but I'd have no problem with somebody saying Hank Lundy won that fight. That was a hell of a performance, a good performance for Hank Lundy. He came to win. He went to the Ukraine to do it. So tough Philadelphia fighter. You got to get up. You got to give it up to Hank Lundy. But I was at the Crawford Lundy fight when Crawford fought Lundy, and Postol went to hell and high water with Lundy. Crawford blew the hell out of Lundy. Lundy won the first round. I give him the first round, maybe the second round as well. But from there on out, when Crawford switched southpaw and started pumping that damn jab, Lundy had no answer. And it seems like whenever Terence Crawford makes the adjustment and he goes into that southpaw stance, a lot of these fighters don't have an answer. He'll pull the southpaw stance, and his jab out of the southpaw stance is the question. But there has been no answer for Terence Crawford out of the southpaw stance. So, Postol establishing the jab is very key for him in this fight. Jab, 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 jab. That's the key for Postol in this fight. Establishing that jab early. And Terence Crawford is kind of like a lot of people. I've heard say that. I've heard a couple people say, a couple of boxing fans say that Terence Crawford reminds them of Pernell Whitaker. Now, when you watch Terence Crawford, he does not have slick defensive skills comparable to Pernell Whitaker. He's not as flashy as Pernell Whitaker, but he's still, I think the reason people say that is because when you look at Terence Crawford and what Pernell Whitaker have in common, it's that they're both the kind of fighters that study their opponents. Pernell wasn't always the fastest starter. He could, but he wasn't always the fastest starter. And they're all about, setting the tempo, setting the distance, and setting the timing. And they both do it really well. When Terence fights out of the southpaw stance and he pumps that damn jab, it looks like Pernell Whitaker, damn near pretty much looks like Pernell Whitaker. So, Terence, this is his chance. I wrote, when I was writing boxing articles, I haven't written a boxing article in a while, but when I was writing boxing articles, I seriously believe that Terence Crawford has the chance to become the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. I think he's that talented. All that being taken into account, this fight right here is going to prove whether he's the real deal or if, actually, I don't even want to say that because I still think even if he loses this fight, he's the real deal. He's just sometimes a guy's better than you on that night, but this is hands down the hardest challenge of his career. Hands down. No questions asked. Especially recently. Recently, he's been fighting guys who are overmatched. So, I think people who don't like Crawford too much, they're going to love this fight. I like Postol. He's a beast. He's a monster. You can't count him out in this fight. But prediction-wise, I'm going with Terence Crawford. I just think, you know, when you go and watch the Hank Lundy fight, Hank Lundy was able to have a lot of success. Hank Lundy was able to get on the inside. Hank Lundy, very crafty. Terence Crawford, out of the southpaw stance, I don't think Viktor Postol is gonna have an answer for it. He's a good fighter, but look at Matisse. Matisse is not a guy that has the highest boxing IQ. Nor does Matisse have a lot of defensive skill. So I just think that Postol, as good as he is, he's gonna find out when he gets in the ring that he's in there with a different class of fighter than he's used to. Same with Crawford, but I think Crawford, if we had to really compare the two resumes at this point, Crawford is the more battle-tested of the two. He's went to Scotland and beat Ricky Burns, a guy who had a ton of title defenses. Stopped Hank Lundy, a guy who's really hard to look good against. Nobody's blew Hank Lundy like that. Only guy to beat Gamboa. Outboxed Prescott on 2 weeks' notice. Just a good fighter. Just a hell of a resume. And while Postol has been racking up good names, Idine's solid. Matisse stopping that is a great win. But Crawford's the more battle-tested. I think Crawford is one of those guys. It's very seldom in boxing that you see guys break down fights. Like when they have, everybody has a game plan, right? I like to say this. Everybody has a game plan, but few fighters have formulas. There's a difference between game plans and formulas. A game plan is what you're going to do to beat the other opponent. A formula is when you have a detailed outline of how you beat everybody. All right, and very few fighters in the ring ever develop formulas. Mayweather had a formula. Pacquiao had a formula. Mayweather's formula was, when he was Money Mayweather, when his hands were a little bit, when his hands kind of busted up, and he didn't have the power when he moved, especially when he moved up in weight. His formula was to jab you, tie you up, throw off your timing, and outbox you. That's really what his formula was. It wasn't nothing more than that. Pacquiao's formula was to, if he didn't have a conventional jab, he's throwing at least a lot of flurries and 4 to 5 punches, a lot of lateral movement, in and out, side to side, jab, straight left hand, but it's coming from different angles, and it's coming, he's turning you, left hand, jab. They have formulas, all right? They have it broken down. Crawford has a formula. His formula is you give the first round away. You use the first round to look at what your opponent has got in front of you, and you usually do it out of the orthodox stance. Once Crawford sees a crack or a crevice that he can exploit, that's when, on a dime, he goes to southpaw. The angles change, the way you have to move around the ring changes, and there's almost nothing you can do, seemingly. So he's broken it down to a formula. And when you're fighting a guy like that, those guys are the most dangerous. Ali had a formula for the most part. At heavyweight, a lot of guys couldn't move like that at heavyweight. So Ali's formula in some of his biggest fights, when he was an underdog and people thought he would get killed by George Foreman, his formula was a lot of, stick the jab and move side to side, tire these guys out, tie them up, go to the ropes, let them punch themselves out, take punishment if you have to, but let your conditioning take over in the later rounds. And he did that so many times. Had a formula. And Postol has a game plan. He doesn't have a game plan, but Postol hasn't fought enough great fighters or enough good fighters, I should say, to have a formula. He's fought a lot of guys in Ukraine, built his way up to get to America. He beat Selçuk Aydin and he beat Lucas Matisse. That's really it. Crawford, like I said before, Lundy, Gamboa, Prescott, Burns, Delorme, the guy who was ranked number. That's five really good fighters. They're not really good fighters. Gamboa, at one point in time, A-level potential, but definitely solid B when Terence fought him. Lundy, lower B fighter when Terence fought him. Prescott, C plus fighter, but you know, because of him taking it on 2 weeks' notice, it's looked at as a better win. So Lundy, Gamboa, Prescott, Burns. Ricky Burns is a solid B-level fighter who made a whole host of title defenses. True champion when he fought. And then who else was there? Delorme. Delorme, lower B to upper C class fighter, but first fight at 140. And that guy is big, a big 140 pounder, and Crawford just dissected him. So he's had his formula tested against better opposition than Postol, which is why I think he's more ready for this fight. I think Postol just is not going to have the lateral movement nor the movement in general to deal with Crawford slipping, sliding, turning, switching southpaw, switching punch angles, and that's how I feel about the fight. But with all that being taken into account, Crawford has to avoid getting hit by Viktor Postol, because if he does, do not let the 12 KOs fool you. Crawford can and he will hit the canvas if Postol touches him with a straight right hand flush. Trust me on that one. Postol can crack. Gloves are lighter here. He's got 3 knockouts in his 4 fights in America. So as far as I'm concerned, 75% knockout percentage. But it is what it is. I'm looking forward for this fight. To me, I know we have Ward Kovalev tentatively signed. Those guys still got to get past their mandatory obligations. But, you know, if Ward Kovalev doesn't happen, to me, my personal opinion, this is, as far as talent goes, as far as skill goes, as far as importance to their division goes, the fight of the year. Not saying in terms of excitement. I'm saying in terms of how important it is to the division. A-level guys. You know, both of these guys have at least beaten somebody. I mean, if we look at them in Porter's best wins are against Malignaggi and Broner. Good wins. They're decent wins, but Malignaggi really, I mean, he's Malignaggi. He's B-class fighter, lower B-class fighter, decent. And then, what was it? Malignaggi and Broner. Broner's a C-plus fighter. C-plus fighter making A-plus money. It's ridiculous. But there's that. And then Thurman, I mean, I love Thurman, but best win is Diego Chavez. I mean, I'm just saying, man, Thurman and Crawford and Postol have beaten better opposition, okay, than Thurman and Porter, which to me makes them higher caliber fighters, which means that this fight, to me, has higher stakes. Not just that, it's a unification fight. It's the number 1 and number 2 guy. It's not the number 5 and number 6 guy, or the number 4, the number 5 guy. This is the best fighting the best in the division, and the winner will be unified champion. And then, you know, I think the winner of this fight should go on to fight Adrian Granados or Amir Imam. Amir Imam, if I were a promoter, if I was Don King, who promotes Amir Imam, and whoever promotes Granados, I would make the Granados Imam rematch happen. If it's possible. Winner of that fight fights Viktor Postol, or simply that because of Adrian Granados won, if they can't make that fight happen, Adrian Granados should fight the winner of this fight. Simple as that. But that's my take on it. But yeah, man, I got Crawford winning by unanimous decision. I think he's gonna outbox Postol 8 rounds to 4. But he's gonna have to overcome some adversity and getting stunned a few times and maybe potentially even hurt. But let me know what you guys think. Terence Crawford, Viktor Postol wins this fight, and why? Leave your comments down below. Take the time to subscribe, and you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Daniel. So until next time, take care, guys.